Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Liam had always believed that open communication was the foundation of any healthy relationship. At 29, he worked as a paramedic on rotating shifts that kept him away from home for long hours, but he never doubted the trust he'd built with Sophie over 5 years of marriage. She was 28 and worked as a yoga instructor at a boutique studio frequented by upper-middle-class women, always talking about positive energy, authentic connections, and living free from emotional baggage. Liam found it fascinating the way Sophie saw the world, even when her philosophies seemed a bit detached from the practical reality he faced in ambulances every day. The conversation started on a Sunday night while they were sharing a pizza in the living room. Sophie casually mentioned that a friend from the studio, Brianna, had talked about special parties she and her husband attended, parties where couples pushed boundaries, tried new things, and broke out of their routines. Liam chewed slowly, trying to figure out where she was going with this. Sophie laughed, touching his arm with that practiced lightness she always used when introducing something delicate. She said it wasn't weird at all, just adults being honest about their desires and curiosity. Liam raised an eyebrow but kept his tone light, asking if she was suggesting something. Sophie shrugged and said maybe it'd be interesting to see what it was like, just to know, with no strings attached. In the days that followed, the topic came up in small doses. Sophie mentioned how Brianna and her husband seemed more connected after exploring things together, how the experience had actually strengthened their relationship. Liam listened, but a growing unease settled in the back of his mind. It wasn't exactly jealousy, it was more the feeling that Sophie was selling something he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. He imagined it might be a shared fantasy, maybe something voyeuristic but harmless. When she finally asked if he'd be willing to go to one of those parties, Liam hesitated for just a second before agreeing. He didn't want to seem insecure or old-fashioned, and part of him believed they could just observe and leave if they didn't like it. The party was set for a Friday night at a large house in the suburbs, far from the city center where they lived. Sophie spent the entire week excited, picking out a dress Liam had never seen before and talking about how liberating it would be. He smiled, but the knot in his stomach wouldn't go away. On the night of the event, they drove in silence for the first 15 minutes until Sophie started talking about the rules. She said the important thing was to respect each other's space, not judge, and just let things flow naturally. Liam nodded, but the words sounded too rehearsed, as if she'd memorized a script. From the outside, the house looked discreet, but inside it had soft lighting, ambient music, and about 20 people spread throughout the living room and hallways. Couples chatted in small groups, some more intimately than others. Liam accepted a drink he didn't really want and stayed close to Sophie at first. She greeted Brianna with a warm hug, and they were soon introduced to other people. Liam felt the stares, the silent evaluations, and wondered how the hell he'd agreed to this. After half an hour, Sophie started to loosen up. She laughed loudly, touched the arm of a dark-haired man who introduced himself as Derek, and chatted like they were old friends. Liam tried making conversation with Derek's wife, a bored-looking blonde, but the exchange never really took off. He kept an eye on Sophie from the corner of his vision, noticing how she tilted her head when Derek spoke and how she bit her lower lip in a way Liam knew all too well. It was her tell, how she looked when she was interested, when she wanted more than just conversation. When Sophie disappeared down the hallway with Derek, Liam's chest tightened. She glanced back just once and gave him a small wave, as if to say everything was fine. Liam stood frozen in the middle of the room, clutching an empty glass, trying to decide what to do. Derek's wife had vanished too, probably with another man. The rules of that place seemed obvious to everyone but him. Liam walked down the hallway, saw a slightly open door at the end, and heard muffled voices. He didn't go in. Instead, he pulled out his phone, turned on the recording function, and discreetly placed it on a nearby shelf with the camera pointed at the door. Then he left the house without telling anyone. He drove home on autopilot, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He wasn't angry yet, he was in shock. He tried to process what had just happened, what Sophie had done, and what it meant for their marriage. When he got home, he took a shower and got into bed, but couldn't sleep. He just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from the past week, searching for signs he'd ignored. Sophie came home at 2 in the morning. Liam heard the front door open, her footsteps in the hallway, and the sound of running water in the bathroom. She crept into the bedroom carefully, as if trying not to wake him, and slid under the covers. Liam kept his eyes closed, pretending to sleep, while he noticed a strange scent, an unmistakable truth he'd been dreading. The next morning, Liam woke up early and made coffee, not just regular coffee, but an elaborate one with steamed milk and cinnamon, exactly how Sophie liked it. He set the kitchen table with 2 plates, toast, jam, everything perfectly arranged. When Sophie appeared, still groggy, she smiled in surprise. She said she hadn't expected such care, that he was too sweet. Liam smiled back, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and asked her to sit down. Sophie was halfway through her toast when Liam picked up the tablet that had been face down on the table and turned it toward her. He pressed play. The screen showed Sophie entering a dark room with Derek, the door closing behind them, followed by nearly 2 minutes of muffled sounds and intimate conversation that made it clear what was happening inside. Liam had only pointed the camera at the door, capturing the moment she walked in with Derek, away from him and without a word. The recording didn't show much, but it showed enough. Sophie turned pale. The toast slipped from her plate. She stammered, saying this was exactly what they'd come for, that he knew, that they'd agreed. Liam kept his voice calm, almost clinical. He said he hadn't agreed to any of this, he'd gone thinking it would be something different, something they'd do together, not separately. Sophie tried to argue that he was misunderstanding, that an open relationship meant precisely this. Liam shook his head slowly and tapped to the next video. This time, it was a compilation of messages, texts Sophie had exchanged in a secret group chat, dated 6 months earlier. The messages showed Sophie arranging meetups at previous parties, always on Thursdays, always when Liam was on his night shift at the hospital. There were photos of her in places Liam didn't recognize, always with people he'd never seen, laughing and commenting about who would be next. Sophie tried to grab the tablet, but Liam pulled it away. He kept scrolling through the evidence, Uber receipts to unfamiliar addresses, hotel charges on nights she'd claimed to be at yoga workshops, messages to Brianna planning how to convince Liam to go to that first party so it would seem like a new, spontaneous idea. Sophie started crying, but they were tears of panic, not regret. She accused Liam of invading her privacy, of hacking her phone without permission. Liam replied that yes, he had hacked it, 3 weeks earlier, when he noticed Sophie acting distant, always keeping her phone face down. He was a paramedic, not a hacker, but he had friends who knew tech. And what he found confirmed every suspicion he'd been trying to ignore. Sophie switched tactics. She said it was all a misunderstanding, that they could talk, go to couples therapy, rebuild. Liam took a sip of coffee, letting the silence weigh between them. Then, with the same surgical calm, he told her he'd already hired a lawyer. That copies of all the evidence had already been sent to the firm. That divorce proceedings would begin on Monday. Sophie choked up, asking if he wasn't overreacting, if they couldn't at least try. Liam stood up, grabbed a folder from the fridge, and tossed it onto the table. Inside were printed copies of all the messages, photos, receipts. He told her she could keep it, she'd need it when her lawyer asked. Then he walked into the living room, grabbed his car keys, and left. He didn't look back. In the days that followed, Liam moved temporarily into a coworker's place while the legal process moved forward. Sophie tried calling, texting, but he blocked every contact. All communication would go through their lawyers. Liam didn't want revenge in the traditional sense, but he also wasn't going to let Sophie rewrite the story as if he were the one at fault for not understanding her rules. What Sophie didn't know was that Liam had gone beyond just the affair evidence. he discovered that Derek wasn't just a casual participant at those parties. Derek was married, a father of 3, and used those gatherings to manipulate younger women, offering promises of partnerships and exposure to lure women looking for opportunities. Sophie had fallen right into his pitch. Derek worked as a marketing director at a wellness company, and Sophie dreamed of expanding her personal yoga brand. He'd promised her partnerships, sponsorships, visibility. Liam didn't confront Derek directly. Instead, he gathered all the proof, the party details, the incriminating messages, and sent an anonymous package to Derek's wife. He included photos, screenshots, party addresses, everything. The fallout was immediate. Derek's wife, Catherine, was a lawyer. She filed for divorce and took the matter to Derek's company, where he had to answer legally for his actions. Derek lost major contracts and had to step away from his job temporarily to deal with personal matters. Sophie started feeling the consequences too. Brianna, who'd introduced her to that world, completely cut ties as soon as Derek's scandal broke. Other instructors at the yoga studio began whispering. Some clients quietly drifted away, and the emotional toll hit Sophie hard. The studio owner, worried about the business's reputation, suggested Sophie take a temporary leave while things cooled down. 2 weeks later, that leave turned into a silent dismissal. During the divorce, Sophie tried arguing that the relationship was open, that Liam knew about the parties, that he'd consented. Liam's lawyer presented the messages proving she'd hidden everything from him, the lies about workshops, the secret meetups during his night shifts. He also showed screenshots where Sophie and Brianna laughed about how naive and easy to fool Liam was. The judge had no doubts. The asset division favored Liam, especially since Sophie had used joint funds to finance parts of her secret encounters, including expensive outfits and hotel stays. Sophie played one last card. She showed up at the house where Liam was staying, asking to talk. She said she'd made mistakes, that she was lost, that she needed help. Liam opened the door but didn't let her in. He looked at her, the woman who'd been his wife for 5 years, and felt a mix of pity and relief. Pity because Sophie clearly didn't grasp the gravity of what she'd done. Relief because he was getting out before it was too late. He said just one thing before closing the door, that she'd confused freedom with betrayal, that she'd destroyed something real for empty fantasies. That he wished her peace, but that peace wouldn't include him. Sophie stood on the porch for a few minutes after the door shut, maybe hoping he'd change his mind. He didn't. 6 months later, Liam was starting to rebuild. The divorce wrapped up without further complications. He kept the house. Sophie accepted a settlement that left her with less than she'd hoped for, but without the energy to fight anymore. Liam refocused on work, friends, and hobbies he'd dropped during the marriage. He started running again, cooking, reading the books that had been piling up on his nightstand. It was at a support group for people going through tough divorces that Liam met Nora. She was a therapist, 32 years old, volunteering as a facilitator. They talked after a session, just a casual conversation about how hard it was to trust again after betrayal. Nora had a gentle way of speaking, no judgment, no rush. They exchanged numbers, started grabbing coffee together, and slowly, very slowly, Liam felt it might be possible to open up again. 8 months after the separation, Liam was engaged. Not because he was in a hurry, but because Nora was different. She was transparent, honest, spoke about fears and expectations without games. He proposed on a trail they walked together every Sunday, at the top of a hill overlooking the city. Liam hadn't planned anything grand, he just felt it was the right moment. Nora said yes before he even finished asking. Sophie heard about the engagement through a mutual friend who still followed Liam on social media. She tried sending a congratulatory message, but his number was still blocked. She tried email, a short note saying she was happy for him, that he deserved happiness. Liam read it but didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Sophie's life had taken a different turn. She'd had to move to another city and start over. She lost the studio, most of her professional contacts, and the reputation she'd spent years building. She tried restarting with online private lessons, but the competition was fierce, and she no longer had the support network she once did. Brianna blocked her everywhere. Derek vanished completely after his own scandal, and the other partygoers scattered, each dealing with their own problems. Sophie spent months trying to figure out where it all went wrong. She saw a therapist who told her things she wasn't ready to hear, that she'd used the philosophy of freedom as an excuse to avoid real issues in the marriage, that she'd confused excitement with connection, and that she'd underestimated Liam, thinking he'd accept anything as long as she wrapped it in the right words. A year after the split, Sophie saw photos of Liam and Nora's wedding on mutual friends' social media. It was a small, intimate ceremony, just close friends and family. Liam smiled in a way Sophie hadn't seen in years, genuine, weightless. Nora stood beside him in a simple but elegant dress, and there was a lightness in the photo that made Sophie's chest ache. It wasn't exactly jealousy, it was the awareness of what she'd lost. Of what she'd thrown away. Sophie closed her laptop and looked around the small apartment she now called home. There was no decor, no personality, just a place to sleep. She was 30 now, but felt 10 years older. Her few online clients barely covered the bills. Real friends had drifted away. Brianna never replied again. Derek had ruined his own life too, but at least he had kids, a life before the disaster. Sophie only had the wreckage. She thought about sending Liam another message, maybe a real apology, with no expectation of a reply. But she knew it would be selfish. He'd moved on, built something new and healthy. She had no right to intrude on that with her own guilt. So Sophie did the only thing she could, accepted that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. That some choices carried permanent consequences. And that if she wanted a different future, she'd have to start making different choices now. Liam never thought about the party, the videos, or the messages again. He stored everything on an external hard drive tucked in the back of a drawer, just in case, but never opened it. Not because he'd forgiven her, but because he'd moved on. He'd found something better, something real. And when Nora asked about his previous marriage, he told the truth without drama or bitterness. He simply said it had been a mistake to trust someone who didn't understand the value of trust. Nora listened, held his hand, and told him he'd never have to carry that alone again. 3 years later, Liam and Nora were expecting their first child. Life had moved on, as it always does for those who choose to move forward. Sophie remained in the city she'd relocated to, still teaching online, still trying to rebuild. She never attended another party, never chased that kind of empty excitement again. She'd learned, too late, that freedom without responsibility was just another name for self-destruction. Liam was on the balcony of their new apartment, Nora beside him, when a notification popped up on his phone. It was a message from an unknown number. Out of curiosity, he opened it. It was from Sophie. It simply read, "Congratulations on the baby. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Liam showed it to Nora, who read it and shrugged. He typed a short reply, "Thank you." Then he blocked the number again, not out of anger, but because there was finally, definitively, no room for Sophie in his life anymore. Nora asked if he was okay. Liam looked at her growing belly, at the home they'd built together, and said yes. That he was more than okay. That he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time in years, it was the absolute truth. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.